some of whom go back a long way, a few of whom don't look quite as young as I remember them. I suspect for some of them I don't look quite as young as they remember me, so it's all remarkable. Please sit down sometime. I have a number of things I want to say. I thought I would start, first of all, we have so many friends. I actually have to start by thanking Raina, who put this whole thing together, and I'm really very, very grateful. I also want to thank Bubba McDonald, who is just great. We literally got to know each other when he belonged to a party which is no longer a big factor in Georgia. I was asked earlier about the polls, and I said, I was talking recently with Senator Michelle Nunn. You remember those polls? Bud was a great friend. He has really helped build the statewide party, and I'm really delighted. Right next to him is Gary Black, who not only is a great agriculture commissioner, but I will also tell you is my son-in-law's greatest hope for effective dove shooting. And therefore I was given instructions, whatever else I did today, suck up to Gary. And this is family obligation. The person who carried that message is here with us, my daughter Jackie, and we're thrilled that we can be back together. But I also, when I see people like Nancy Coverdale, Fred Cooper, folks who built the party, and you have to remember, when we were first out there, it was really hard. You could go for miles and miles and not find another Republican. And gradually, it all began to come together in a way that's remarkable. Also, Ike Reichert has been an extraordinarily dear friend, a spiritual advisor, one of the most insightful preachers I have ever listened to. If you haven't ever heard one of his sermons, he'd be glad later on to share with you how you can come and listen to as many as you like. But he is really a remarkable man, so thank you for being here. And Senator, thank you so much for coming and being part of it. And I really am grateful that we had Congressman Odernote was able to join us by video. This is something I have to do a lot because you can't get to the whole country, so I'm grateful when somebody takes the time to do it, and I'm very, very appreciative. Let me also say that we have a lot of strong supporters. Dr. Lee is here, who's done a great job of raising resources. The truth is, even with somebody as successful as Trump, he doesn't mind having some help in the general election. When he looks at, when you combine Hillary's campaign, the super PACs, the unions, and the news media, that's a lot to run against simultaneously. So I'm delighted that you can help them. And I also want to say this, one other thing, which is Dr. Kerwin Smith, who I've not met, is he here? I want to say thank you to him wherever he's at, because he is a department head who's helped make us possible. I used to teach a long time ago. I taught a course which ended up being televised, and we had about 100,000 students nationwide on renewing American civilization, which is a topic which never goes away because American civilization is always one generation deep. Now, I want to focus and talk in a pretty serious way for a few minutes, then we're going to toss it open for questions, and we'll go to whatever you want to. But I really want to talk about two ideas, and I've written some notes because I want to capture it exactly right. So I want to talk about two Ds, deplorable and dishonesty. But before I discuss them, I also take 1 minute to just say that I hope all of you will take a little time in your prayers to include Secretary Clinton. She is our opponent, she's not our enemy. We wish her well. I've known Hillary for 24 years. And I was a little concerned yesterday, and I think that none of us wish her ill. We want to defeat her fairly and honorably, but we don't want her to be physically humiliated. So, I want to say that in advance because while I'm going to take her ideas seriously, I also respect the fact that she does have, at least for the moment, some significant health concerns. Now, she gave a talk the other night, in which, and this is a talk that she has used these terms several times. This was not one of those, oh gee, I made a mistake moments. And she actually reflects most of the modern left, which is why I thought this would be a very good time to talk about both deplorable and dishonest. And so she said that there were all these folks who were deplorable. And she said that, at least half of the Trump supporters. And then she came back the next day and said, well, she shouldn't have really said half. But she really only meant, 41% or whatever. You could ask her, what's your survey of deplorables this week? And I know a couple of you are wearing, you have a deplorable t-shirt? This will be the next growth industry. So, here is, she then went on to say, because she defined what she meant by deplorable. And I think it's very helpful, and actually, in a way she probably did not intend, opens up a conversation about the entire American left as it has evolved over the last 30 or 40 years. So she said the deplorables were racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, and Islamophobic. Now, the reason as most of you know, I very seldom use notes, but I want to make sure I got all of them. I didn't want to add some X that she hadn't talked about, so I just stuck with her X. Racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, and Islamophobic. Now, let me explain why you're seeing this kind of campaign. The left has done such a terrible job at a practical level that they can't have a discussion about the real world. So if Donald Trump goes to Detroit to a black church in a city where the schools are failing so badly that only 5 or 6% of the third graders can read, I mean, literally condemning generations of young African Americans to a hopeless future. Well, you can't, how are you going to debate that? You're going to stand up and say, well, maybe our schools don't educate anybody, but they pay the union on time. Which is the primary purpose of large inner city schools now. They're essentially union payment machines, which occasionally teach somebody. Well, you can't have that debate. So you have to yell racist. And in fact, several people said, how dare he go there? When he gave a talk about Milwaukee, somebody else said, how dare he go there? Even though the sheriff in Milwaukee, Sheriff Clark, is an African American, he supports Trump. But that he can't really be an African American, even if he looks African American, because if he really African American, he couldn't be for Trump. Therefore, since he's for Trump, we don't actually know what Sheriff Clark is like. Although when I've been with him, I thought he was an African American. The same thing happened to Dr. Carson, who was a great pediatric neurosurgeon with extraordinary worldwide skills, with a movie made about him called Gift in Hands, which if you've never seen is a wonderful movie. And I thought, and I heard him speak at the National Prayer Breakfast, I thought he was amazing. And I actually thought he was African American until he ran. And he went back to his old neighborhood with Trump, and you just knew it must have been a Polish neighborhood or something, because after all, I mean, you're not allowed to be an African American who's for Trump because Trump is a racist. And this is what we've degenerated to. The modern left, including most of the academics, cannot defend the disaster that their policies create. And so they know if we get into an honest debate about what's going wrong with university, look at Chicago, where you've had, I saw a note this morning, Chicago currently is averaging, I think it is 1 shooting every 2 hours. I mean, it's insane. And yet, you have a Democratic mayor who used to be chief of staff, and before that congressman, chief of staff to the president. You have a president from Chicago. You have a presidential nominee who was born in Chicago, What's the Democratic solution to the fact that we're killing more Americans in Chicago than were killed in Iraq and Afghanistan combined? Well, the answer, of course, is that there's a racist comment. Because as a Republican, how dare you care about black people? And the left believes this. I mean, go look at Twitter on Monday. You'll see all sorts of people spewing hatred and vitriol because they can't debate. We do know, by the way, how to dramatically reduce murders. It's done by a guy named Rudy Giuliani. And Giuliani recently said if he had not become mayor of New York, it would have become Detroit. And I think he's right. But what did Giuliani do? Oh, he applied conservative principles. They saved literally thousands of lives. They reduced the murder rate by 85%. They created a safe environment where jobs came back to New York, tourists came back to New York. Well, the current mayor, who's a radical leftist, is trying to undo all that. Because the left's vision is that the police harassing you is a greater danger than being killed. And so what have the police done? The police have said, fine, you don't mean to harass people, I won't. By the way, I'm going to be sitting over here at the police station while I get shot. And tragically, the story I read this morning about Chicago involved a policeman whose son was killed sitting on the porch in a drive-by shooting, who said, we have lost control of the streets. But to say that is to be racist. So instead of having the left say, thank God Donald Trump cares about the inner city poor, and we finally have a Republican candidate with the guts to go right in the heart of the inner city. The truth is, the left does not want to see a Republican candidate in the inner city, and the old failed black power structure does not want to see a Republican in the inner city. And so they would rather endure the disaster. They'd rather endure the joblessness, the schools that don't work, the streets that are violent, and the corruption among politicians than fix it. And so you can't defend them. How are you going to have a debate and say that, right? Hi, I'm your friendly mayor, and I'm in favor of being corrupt and having all the institutions fail while you get shot. You can't do that. So instead you jump up and you scream racist. So that was part one of Hillary's rap. Part two was sexist. Now, my talking about this gets me in a little trouble. I recognize that, and my daughter's already staring at me thinking, oh, here we go again. But I'm going to go out on an edge. I know, I've almost never done this in my whole career. You know, I have two daughters, I have a granddaughter, I have great concern that they all have a wonderful life. But when you have the former First Lady of the United States, former Senator from New York, former presidential candidate, former Secretary of State, multi-millionaire, current Democratic nominee, explained that almost 50 years ago, when she took the law exam, she felt oppressed because some of the guys weren't friendly. She said this today. It's one of those moments when you think, what planet does she live on? How can you carry deep in your heart a 45-year-old grievance which somewhere between First Lady of Arkansas, First Lady of the United States, U.S. Senator, Democratic nominee, multi-millionaire, somewhere you'd have thought there was a bomb. Yeah. They would have allowed her to recognize that America's probably changed. It's now probably guys who are getting dissed by girls because girls outscore them. I mean, imagine the humiliation of guys who used to be dominant now actually having to compete with girls. Many of them are pretty smart, and it's just a mess. So us males are sitting there, let me get this straight. You're telling me that 45 years ago somebody bothered you enough that it's still a current grievance in your brain? And you want me to think you're mature enough to be president? I mean, this is a call for therapy, not a call for now, again, there are genuine examples of problems, but let me give you an example of a real problem. A real problem problem is countries that still engage in clitorectomies. The real problem is countries which still enslave women. The real problem is countries in which women who are raped have to have 4 witnesses, or they are guilty of the violation. Now, these are the countries, of course, which give money to the Clinton Foundation, so we wouldn't want Hillary to say too many things about that kind of question, because that might The third word is homophobic. Now, forgetting that I have a sister who has for over a decade been an active leader in the Human Rights Coalition, forgetting that we have many friends who are gay, forgetting all the different things, because none of those things count, of course, because the fact that I am, in fact, as a practicing Christian in favor of traditional marriage proves I must be homophobic, because if I wasn't homophobic, I would have to be for whatever people now say you have to be for, because after all, if we're not going to obey the Supreme Court and do exactly what NBC News wants us to, we must be bad people. My only answer is give me a break. You live in the freest country. Well, now again, if you want to talk about genuine homophobia, how about Iran, which executes gays? How about Saudi Arabia, which executes gays? Oh, but Iran is now our newest friend, to whom we ship $1 billion+ in cash. You think about this. This is like Lethal Weapon as a movie, right? You know, if I showed you, here's an airplane filled with gas, you would have said, drug deal. No. Obama deal. Obama deal is bigger than drug deal. I know of no drug deal which involved 4 or 5 airplanes full of cash. This is real money, which the Iranians wanted in cash so they could distribute it to terrorists more easily. I mean, it's such a pain to try to take bank accounts and launder them and try to avoid the U.S. Treasury. But if you only give them cash, you can just handle terrorism so much easier. So if you want to talk about genuine homophobia, you go back to the same issue of sexism, which is there are countries on the planet that are operationally, practically, every day, in a real way, homophobic. A number of them are donors to the Clinton Foundation. But when the Clinton Foundation accepts sexist, homophobic money, that's not inappropriate, because their hearts are pure. And they mean well. And Bill personally will tell you that in his experiences, he's always tried to do that which he thought was right, even when it wasn't right. And it had to have been right because he was doing it. And if you don't understand that it was right, you are a racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobe. So how dare you question the money they get from dictators who are genuinely sexist and homophobic? Then you get to their last big word, the newest of the phobics, Islamophobia. And this is again sort of mildly nuts, or maybe very nuts. You know, yesterday I wrote a very tough newsletter. Those of you who don't get them, you can get a free newsletter twice a week at Gingrich Productions. And my newsletter and I was asked to do this by Fox News because they also publish it at foxnews.com. My newsletter this weekend was very tough. And it said 15 years after 9/11, we're not winning. In fact, we've gone from George W. Bush in a joint session to Congress on the Thursday after 9/11, the 20th of September, saying there was an axis of evil. He listed North Korea, Iran, and Iraq, to shipping $1 billion in cash to part of the axis of evil. While the second part of the axis of evil is a total mess. And by the way, we have 4,600 troops in Iraq right now. And I'm personally tired, and I would say this about both camps, I'm tired of being told about troop boots on the ground. The objective reality is U.S. forces are all over the planet. The objective reality is they're at risk. And the objective reality is if we pulled our troops out of Afghanistan, the Afghan government will collapse in a few weeks. Because we're not winning. We're not doing what it takes to defeat the enemy. And I find, as a son of a 27-year infantryman, I find it very offensive that we've lost thousands of young men and women. We've had tens of thousands severely wounded. We've spent trillions of dollars. And on a bipartisan basis, we have no strategy for victory. And one of the reasons I'm for Trump is that Trump has the guts to say, you know, we ought to rethink the whole thing because it ain't working. And if you don't have the courage to say it ain't working, you can't start. So let me talk a little bit about what I think of Islamophobia is in their mind. I think we should vet the Syrians because ISIS is based in Syria. But I think we should frankly be serious about vetting virtually everybody. I mean, there are people in England. Now, this, of course, would make me xenophobic. Forget the fact that I used to live in France with my dad, and I used to live in Germany with my dad, and I did my dissertation. Jackie and her sister lived with us in Brussels. Forget the fact that my PhD is in European history. You know, I am clearly xenophobic because I actually want to defend America. And defending America would imply that I think there's America and not America. Whereas all good liberals know that America is in fact a country best weakened and made timid and put in its place as a morally inferior place. Which is why, as a side note, you have Barack Obama who wants to give the internet control over to an international organization, taking it away from a company. The United States currently has a contract which allows us to have ultimate say on the internet. We invented it, we developed it, we've kept it free, we've made it possible for people worldwide to use it, and the result, of course, is good liberals therefore think we have to give it away, because who are we to protect freedom when you could have Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Cuba, Venezuela, Russia, China, and all the other Iran, all the other great defenders of freedom, Saudi Arabia. I mean, you almost have to be deranged to be a modern liberal. You have to have this limited... You have to have this very limited contact with reality. Because if you had a lot of contact with reality, you'd be questioning virtually everything you believe. And how could you seriously argue that an international organization which has Saudi Arabia, Iran, Russia, and China is more likely to protect the internet than the United States? But I guarantee you, the Obama administration and Hillary Clinton will make that case. So, finally, the reason they have to use these nasty, nasty, nasty words is they can't win a debate. And the reason they have to lie is they can't defend their reality. Now, some of this goes all the way back to Bill Clinton, but it really accelerated with Barack Obama. Remember, campaigned on the grounds that you could keep your doctor. Yeah. You could keep your insurance, which, by the way, we now know they knew was a lie. Just a plain lie. Not a fudge, not confusing, a lie. And then you get to things like Benghazi, where we now know the entire administration, not just Hillary, the entire administration made a decision that it would weaken their ability to get reelected if they told the truth. So they thought to themselves, tell the truth, maybe not get reelected, lie to the American people about the murder of Americans, maybe get reelected. Oh gosh, I guess we'll have to lie. They went out, they didn't just lie. They lied with such sincerity that they tried to browbeat the Republican candidate into believing that the things he knew happened didn't happen, because if they'd happened, Barack might lose, and Barack's not allowed to lose, therefore they couldn't have happened. And if you watch the one debate, the news media host is busy beating up on the Republican candidate for saying the truth. Well, she's saying it's not the truth. Because it can't be the truth, because if it was the truth, he'd lose. Now, the modern version of that's poor Matt Lauer. Matt Lauer was a nice guy, I don't really show anything. Matt Lauer does a national security debate. And this is, of course, national security. Secretary of State, Senate member of the Armed Services Committee, sophisticated person. Clearly the debate Hillary's going to win. And Matt asked her about the obvious fact that she's lied endlessly about her emails. Clearly a sign that he's deranged. And then the first person he calls on in the audience is a veteran who gets up and say, you know, you corrupted national security. Clearly a sign it was all stacked. And so the elite media, I knew the next morning who'd won, because the New York Times, the entire bottom of the page 15 of the New York Times was people attacking Lauer for having been unfair to Hillary. Which I think is because secretly Matt Lauer was sexist. I think this was, he couldn't help himself. He saw a woman, They saw a chance to exploit her. And so he said, I'm going to ask you about something you're probably not ready for. Emails. And she began to melt down because he had hit her from a side she'd never considered. Because how could a nice friend like that ask her about emails? And then he was even meaner, and he picked some guy. Notice it was a guy in the audience who asked her a nasty question. And so instead of the coronation ceremony on national security that she came for, she actually had to explain herself. And she did it so badly that if you're on the left, you can either say, well, Hillary really blew it, proving you too are sexist. Or you could say, you know, that Matt Lauer was just cheating. I mean, if he hadn't cheated, there's no way Trump could have won that debate, because we all know Trump doesn't know anything about national security, and he's not allowed to win that debate. And if he won that debate, it had to involve cheating. And that's, I don't make this stuff up, I report it. So, Hillary's dishonesty, which is rampant and complete. I mean, she lied about Benghazi, she lies about emails, she lies about, you know, virtually everything. She lies about the corruption of the Clinton Foundation, she lies about what they did in Haiti, which will be coming out in the next couple of days, which is horrendous. I mean, the degree to which the Clintons exploited Haitians is almost unimaginable, and I predict will even make a number of liberals stop because it is so totally disgusting. But my point to all of you is don't think of this as Hillary in isolation. This is Hillary as the personification of a long period in which liberalism gets further and further out of touch with reality, and liberalism's last defense is dishonesty. It's like the 3 professors in Colorado who have announced that they will not allow any student to question global warming because they're not going to tolerate it. That's really the scientific model. This Einstein guy has this weird idea about relativity. Shut him up now. You see it in campuses all over the place. It is tyranny disguised in the name of liberty by people who have to lie because they can't stand to actually debate the issues that they're engaged in. So that's where we are. This is a big deal. This may be as significant an election as any you have been through in your lifetime because the choice is so radical. On the one hand, you have a totally corrupt, dishonest representation of a rigged system with a rigged economy and a rigged structure. On the other side, you have the most brand new, non-politician, outside the box, entrepreneurial business person. So, on one side, you have every element of the corrupt left coming together because they are in grave danger of losing the gravy train if she loses, and they will prop her up and try to carry her to office no matter what because they desperately need the money. On the other side, you have a rapidly growing citizen movement that is sick of the corruption, sick of the dishonesty, sick of the lies, sick of the political correctness, and sick of being told they can't do anything about it, and so they're going to go out and vote to do something about it. And I think that's the choice. And Georgia is a key battleground in this fight. We have an obligation to go out to all of our fellow citizens to communicate across the whole state how big the gap is. You believe in the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms, you have to be for Trump. You believe in a Supreme Court which obeys the law, you have to be for Trump. You believe in an economy based on hard work and on people being able to go out as small businesses and create jobs, you have to be for Trump. You believe in rethinking the national security issues which are currently troubling this country, you have to be for Trump. You go down the list. And so we have to make sure, and one of the reasons I was so thrilled to have a chance to talk with all of you and then with our friends in the media, is we have to make sure that every Georgian understands how really serious the choice is, and there are only 2 choices. There's a radical, left-wing, anti-Second Amendment, anti-religious liberty Supreme Court with Hillary Clinton. There was a huge tax, big government, big corruption, big union future with Hillary Clinton. There is a submerge America in global institutions with Hillary Clinton. And so if you don't want that future, your only realistic choice is Donald Trump. We've been very tolerant, and I think we have a couple of microphones, so we'll give people a chance to ask questions. And okay, where are the microphones? I see one microphone here. Where's the other? Okay. All right, good. There's a young man over there. See? And there's a young lady here. So we'll go to her and then to him, because that's how fast they move.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a concern, not that we aren't going to get out there and vote for Trump, but what's going to happen to the electoral ballots under the Soros-controlled electronic voting machines, and how do we prevent that from happening?
That is a very good, very realistic question. I think voter fraud is a much bigger issue in this country than the media wants to cover. I think we have to have, and my good friend Randy Evans from right here in Georgia is leading an effort. We have to have, frankly, volunteer attorneys at every precinct in the whole country, and they have to be prepared to move immediately that day with any questions. Yes, sir.
I'm black, Muslim, and from Detroit. And my question is, how is it you plan to get black and minority voters to step up, as well as fix inner city problems?
Okay, I think that's a great question. I think what Trump's hope is, starting both with what he said in Milwaukee and what he said last week in Detroit, is that by laying out a program, for example, allowing people to choose whether or not to send their children to a school that's failing, or send them to a school that might succeed, bringing in the kind of policing that both Sheriff Clark and Rudy Giuliani stand for to save lives. I think you're going to see Trump also have some ideas on enterprise zones to create very dramatic opportunities in the inner city, and frankly, to also take all the government assets. If you look at the number of houses that HUD owns that are abandoned in Detroit, they are an impediment to fixing Detroit. And you look at the level of red tape. So I think his goal is going to be very practical and to reach out to people like you and to say, look, we can do better in jobs, we can do better in education, we can do better in safety. Isn't it worth taking a risk when you look at the worst neighborhoods in Detroit? As he said the other day, if you live in the worst neighborhood in Detroit or Chicago or Milwaukee or Baltimore, aren't you better off at least gambling that we could create a better future together? And I think the minute you get a significant number, not a giant number, but a significant number of people like you, younger African Americans who stand up and say, I think it's time to take a chance. I think you'll see a flood tide because they have worked desperately hard to oppress people and say you're not allowed to be for Trump, you're not allowed to say this, you're not allowed to think this. And I think once that starts to happen, it'll be shocking how many people come out, both in African American neighborhoods, but also, frankly, with Latinos and with Asian Americans. I mean, people want jobs, people want dignity, people want a sense of a better future. And so I think you will work very hard.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to say thank you for coming here, first of all. My question would be, one of the main points that Secretary Clinton is running on is to make college affordable. So I was wondering, as a college student, what does Mr. Trump plan to do to make college affordable for everyone?
Well, I think there'll be a number of steps, but let me say, the first step I would take would be to radically cut all federal red tape and regulation. You walk around this campus, there are an awful lot of people who don't have anything to do with students who are sitting around in offices filling out papers for the federal government and state government. I go every couple of years to the College of the Ozarks. College of the Ozarks is a work-study college. You cannot apply unless you need federal aid. They have no federal aid. Everybody there works 20 hours a week during the school year. They work 40 hours a week in the summer. The 20 hours a week in the school year pay for the tuition and the books, and the summer pays for the cost of living for year round. 93% of students graduate owing zero. 7% graduate with debt because they bought a car their senior year. Now, it's a totally different model. Some of you who are students will find it to be sort of horrifying. I mean, it actually means having a job, and that means showing up regularly. And it's a very frugal college. So when first time I went out there, I show up at the president's office, there's one secretary. So I have to walk around the university system and see how many secretaries there are between you and the president, and how many assistant deans and associate deans and vice presidents. And just you got out a hiring list. You put up a hiring chart in the university system and said, let's circle the ones that actually touch students. I'll bet you it's a minority. But the total number of people, now part of this, students also will tell you, well, I really like this extra nice new dorm, and I really like the fact that I only take 1 or 2 classes. I mean, I understood why Bernie Sanders is doing well on campuses. He had a campaign theme that was simple. I'm going to legalize marijuana and make college free, and you'll be happy for the 23 years it takes to graduate. Part of this is not a joke. You look at the number of campuses, I'm not talking about Kennesaw because I don't know the details. Look at the number of campuses where they do not schedule the class you need to graduate. And so you literally spend an extra year waiting for the class for your graduate. That is irresponsible on the part of the administration and increases the cost of students for no real reason. Where's my microphone person? Right there. Okay, got it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is, why don't the Clinton scandals seem to stick? And why did the Justice Department let her off about the email scandal, the Clinton relations scandal, all of these things going way back to Arkansas?
Well, first of all, I do think they're sticking. I mean, you look at the number of people who now think she's a liar, and it's a stunning number for a major party presidential nominee, and it's getting higher. I've actually gotten, as more stuff has come out, I've gotten more unhappy with the director of the FBI. And I'll tell you why. Initially, I thought he had a reasonably rational strategy of saying, we're not going to take her through a jury trial on the edge of an election, but you, the American people, are the jury. Let me share with you what we've learned. Makes sense. Then you discover that there is a direct timeline between issuing subpoenas and destroying not the one device she claimed, 13 devices. Let me tell you, any normal American who destroyed 13 devices after the subpoena was issued would promptly go to jail. This is obstruction of justice. Furthermore, I'm amazed that the people who did it, I mean, remember, she's not out there with a hammer herself. Although who knows, but I don't think so. So imagine, in any healthy environment, the people who were executing those instructions would also go to jail. Instead, at least 2 of them have been offered immunity. Now, what I want to know is, what did they get? What did the government get for the immunity? It was sure and obvious to me. And I think in that sense that Comey has failed. And I didn't think this at his first press conference, but the more stuff that's come out, the more clear it is that what you have here is a classic case of absolute obstruction of justice. And I just predict to you, there's the more and more articles asking what it was she was hiding in the 33,000 deleted emails, which in itself was obstruction of justice. I mean, it was, by the way, in itself a felony because she had promised not to destroy government property. It's astonishing. Okay?
Okay. I'm an African American man, and I was wondering, since you said that Donald Trump was a racist, at one of his rallies he said, you're living in poverty, your schools are no good, you have no jobs, 58% of your youth is unemployed. What the hell else do you have to lose? Okay. my thing is, what have we lost, number one? And what are you going to do to get back? Since you said, what the hell else we got to lose? How you
Right.
gonna get back?
Well, I think what he's saying, let's see what they're going to comment. I think what Trump was saying is, if, and this is completely not true for upper middle class and middle class African Americans who have good jobs and who are doing fine. But if you are in the poorest neighborhoods in America, and you're in a neighborhood where there are no jobs, and the schools are terrible, and in New York, for example, it takes 66 steps to get rid of a bad teacher. 66, because of the union contract. So the principle's clear. You can destroy children's lives, but you can't get rid of the person who's destroying children's lives. And his point is, if you're in a South Side Chicago neighborhood where people are being shot every weekend, maybe not voting Democrat would be a reasonable risk, and you might try voting Republican for Trump, because at a minimum, he might do better than the current team at keeping you alive. I think that's what he's trying to say. And that's why they have to claim he's a racist, because they can't, they're not going to get in a debate about whether or not it's working. The mayor of Chicago is not going to say, oh, the city's really safe. He can't win that debate. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, but he didn't specifically say Chicago. He just said African Americans. But he didn't even say African Americans. He just referenced and had towards African American, to the group of African Americans. So I mean, it sounds good, but he didn't specifically say that Chicago. He didn't say that Detroit. He didn't say Georgia. He didn't say specific places.
I think that's a fair critique. He did. The two places he's made the strongest statements were Milwaukee, which is the 6th poorest city in the country, and Detroit, which is a total disaster in terms of large parts of the inner city. So, but I think your point's valid, that he ought to distinguish between those neighborhoods which are so devastated that it's really a reasonable risk to vote for these guys, and places where people may be doing okay, but on the other hand, I suspect most African Americans don't feel very comfortable about what's happening in the poorest neighborhoods in America. Let's see, I think. Right. He's over here now. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There you go. We want everybody here to hear you.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of all black farmers in the United States, we want to thank you personally for leading the campaign to rewrite the statute of limitation for black farmers, so we was allowed to go into court and to get the justice that we so richly deserve. Unfortunately, as things went by, and in 2008 farm bill, when the Republicans wrote it in there that we had a right to go before the administrative law judges and have our cases be heard on the merits. But because of the Obama administration and the oppression that we have suffered under them, we have over 16,000 cases backed up, not allowed to be heard, because this administration, the Congressional Black Caucus, said that we was undercover Republicans and they was not planning on us getting paid because we have supported you all. When they voted against us being paid back in the days, I don't know, well, you was the Speaker of the House.
Yeah, I remember that case very well. I remember the meetings we held, the people we talked with. Will you do me a favor? After this is all over, go up and talk to my daughter Jackie. Give us your contact information. I'd like to dive into this a little bit. I had no idea of that. And as you pointed out, 2008 would have meant that Pelosi was the head of the House at that time. It was done by a Democratic Congress with a Democratic president, and it's shameful. My boss here tells me 2 more. How about this young lady right here?
My question to you, thank you for being here, first off. Knowing Clinton for so long and now endorsing the Trump campaign and supporting him running for president, do you feel as though there's a difficult position between, supporting Trump and knowing Hillary for so long, or is that just a clear choice for you in the difference in the campaigns, or was it a difficult decision?
Well, it's a good, actually, it's a very good question, because I've known Hillary longer than I've known Trump. I mean, I think under normal circumstances, again, I'm a conservative Republican, she's a liberal Democrat at best. And in some ways she's a radical Democrat. But I'll tell you what I'm struck with, is people will come up to me and say, you know, you and Bill got a lot of stuff done, which we did. Welfare reform, balanced the federal budget, a lot of those stuff. But something happened after he left office. I mean, I had no evidence, and we spent a lot of time together, because you can't balance, you can't negotiate a balanced budget for the entire federal government unless you spend days and days and days talking. And since he and I both are talkers, you could imagine. It was like a graduate school seminar, where, you know, sort of policy wonks comparing ideas. And he is much more conservative than she is. And you can see this if you look at their issues. There's a video that was put out of me, as Speaker of the House, sitting behind Clinton at the first State of the Union after I was sworn in January of '95, in which he has a whole thing on immigration that sounds like it could be Trump. I mean, so it's important to remember he was much more conservative. So I probably would have been fun. But this is what struck me, because somebody asked me about it. Something went sour after they left the White House. And if you had said to me way back then, do I think Bill Clinton would become so money hungry that he'd run around the planet taking the amount of money he took from the kind of people he took it from, and would get the kind of scale of money, the amount of money they've made, makes it almost impossible to defend the idea that they understand or care about anybody who's normal. Because they've gone out all over the place, you know, scarfing up funds from really some very despicable people. And it didn't seem to matter as long as they came with a check. So something went wrong back then, and I think that, so for me it was very easy. I believe Hillary Clinton would be extraordinarily dangerous to the survival of what we know as the rule of law in this country, because I think she is endlessly corrupt, and I think that bringing Bill back into the White House, given his corruption, is an unbelievably dangerous thing. You're there.
Right here. Those of us who are working very hard for Trump in Georgia would like to remind the Trump campaign that we also have a winner in Georgia, and his name is Gingrich. We would love to know from you if you're confident you are going to serve in Trump.
I will have dramatically more influence in a Trump administration than I would in a Clinton administration. And I promise you, I will use that influence to build a conservative and a better America. And I think we have a few minutes to shake hands and things. So can I just say thank you to all of you for being here. And remember, email, Facebook, Twitter, go out and get all of your friends engaged. Thank you.